There we go, recording in progress. Namaste, everybody. So Saturn and Aries we get to talk about today. I'll just share this with you so we can all see what we're looking at together. Oh, a few things in my way here. I gotta try that again. So Saturn and Aries is interesting because it's debilitation planet or debilitation placement for Saturn. And we've noticed from the other nakshatra courses how much the energy of the planet seems to affect the classes so much. And so, of course, we're starting in Saturn and Aries. And so it's been a bit of a push to get the class going, and a bit of a push to get things going. I'm also at the moment, I'm in a Saturn moon Saturn period. And so it's like my poor moon is just being crushed by Saturn. Um, so I'm fully involved with Saturn at the moment. So here we go. One of the more interesting guys I found with this was Machiavelli with this Saturn and Aries. There's a lot of like really tough, independent people with Saturn and Aries. Like their Aries is already very independent sign. And it seems when you put Saturn there, they're that much more determined to be independent. So very, very strong determination to get that independence, to not rely on anybody else. And of course, as we'll see that it sort of we'll see it in each of the houses as it goes around as well. So of course, the Saturn in first house is the personality. That's who they are. Um, I've also found, and I don't have the names because it hasn't been famous people, but some of the personal people I know with Saturn and Aries in sixth house, eighth house, some of these difficult positions. They're also they're struggling with independence because they have, like I've got an autistic client, for example, has a Saturn and Aries, and they're very determined. They want to be independent, and they had huge, huge fights with their parents when they were younger about this, that they didn't want to be independent. Or their parents didn't want them to be, and they wanted to get out, just do things on their own. I have another client from India, early in his Saturn Mahadasha. He's about, I think he's about 50 years old now. So early in his Saturn Mahadasha, he had a brain aneurysm and was in the hospital for about a month and a half, and came out of the hospital. And India, he still lives with his mother, right? He's a bachelor man, and so he still lives with mama. And his mother is driving him crazy because she won't let him go out of the house. And he's just going mad about this. He's like, I got to do something about this. I'm like, dude, your mother's old. Like, you want your independence, but you're going to get it right away. His father just died a few weeks ago, which is why he called me. And so he's got that from his father. And so he's struggling with that himself, wanting independence. Now, we see this quote from Machiavelli. I won't read these quotes to you because you can read those on your own. But he was interesting. Machiavelli, of course, his name is synonymous with almost a kind of sadism in a way these days, very Machiavellian, right? We sort of say, and it's sort of associated with this evil. Now, his book, The Prince, it's a great book. Everybody should read it. All the business school people, they all study The Prince like crazy. Um, and it wasn't so much a manual for the kings who were in power at the time. It was actually a manual for the new prince, which is again very Aries, right? The newness, the revival of something. The Saturn's almost trying to bring some old thing again back to life, give it a whole new kind of a life, which is what Aries is about. And so that's what Machiavelli was mostly writing about, is the new prince. First, how can the new prince overthrow the old prince, the old king? And how can that new prince take and hold power amongst all these very difficult power dynamics? So you'll see quite a bit written on this here. We'll just skip down to the names. Just going to fly all the way down to Saturn in first house. And so Just this morning, I was looking at Jorge Paulo Lehmann, and he's an investment banker. And I really struggled with this. There's no birth time for him. So I kind of, I did this. Do I have his chart down here? Yeah, I've got his chart here. I don't know if I zoom this in, if you can see the zoom. And so we get a chart like Jorge Paulo Lehmann, an investment banker. And so that Saturn in the Aries makes him very powerful, very independent, very determined. But we get the reversal of the debilitation because Mars is going into Capricorn in the 10th house. And of course, Mars in Capricorn in the 10th house is going to make a very powerful leader. They can make very hard, dynamic decisions, this kind of thing. And we'll see with a lot of the names I have here because they're famous people. They've done something with their lives, actually. So we get Eric Prince, who's not quite Machiavelli, but he was a Navy SEAL. This is the guy who founded Blackwater. It's now called Academia. I don't know if you know this. It's basically the mercenary company. I think it really came into power during, maybe it was the second Iraq War when George Bush was in, and they started hiring all these mercenaries, hiring Blackwater to do all the security. And so this is Eric Prince, this kind of Blackwater executive. And so if we zoom his chart in, we get this Mars is coming into Scorpio, which again, it's kind of this undercover sort of deal going on there in the 8th house as well. And so we get that quite a powerful placement. Of course, he became kind of an executive. So you've got Venus there, sort of takes a lot of the edge off that really harsh Saturn, helps him deal with people, makes him a very good negotiator and diplomacy. He sort of branched out. That company does a lot of work in Africa now. And so he's of course he's not a mercenary anymore, but he was a Navy SEAL at one time. But a lot of his work is now this sort of secret diplomacy, underground sort of diplomatic work. If we sort of slide up here, we get Ulysses S. Grant, who was one of the first US presidents, but also had some role to play in the war, in the Civil War in the USA, which is the other sort of thing we get with the Saturn, is we get a lot of warriors with the Saturn and Aries in first house. These are hard, tough people, you know. This is the kind of warrior who's going to go alone, like a Rambo character, right? Go alone behind enemy lines and survive and pull it all off. Now, again, he's got Sun there with his Saturn, exalted Sun with the Saturn. So all these three people we've shown, they kind of reversing that debilitation of Saturn to some degree. He also has Jupiter there, giving a more broad and expansive sort of perspective on all of this sort of stuff. At Ronald Reagan, once we get into, now I think we're going to find quite some big differences between Saturn in the first house and Saturn with the moon. And Saturn with the moon, I'm going to expect it's going to affect the mood a lot more. Where that Saturn in the first house is really drying out the body, right? Again, that Pitta. This is more like the way I envision it. It's like in Varanasi, if you go to the Burning Ghat on kind of a quiet day, Manikarnika Ghat, on kind of a quiet day, and some guide will be there and he'll be telling you how they've been lighting these fires with the same eternal fire forever. And then you'll look over at the eternal fire and you'll go like, well, there's no fire there. Um, and this is because the fire, it's kind of buried in the coals. And you can do this with a fire, is sort of bury it with the ash and bury it with the coals, and all those coals will smolder very, very slowly underneath. And so you're going to get that sort of really hard inner fire where I think these Saturn and Aries people, if you look at them, you're going to think like, who is this guy? He's nothing. They're going to be quite skinny. I think the Saturn's going to diminish the height a little bit of your normal Aries as well. They'll be very slim, very dried out. They probably won't look like a warrior. Their muscles will be very wiry. You'll see all the ligaments and the muscles probably, very sharp, hard features in the face as well. And they might not, you might think this guy can't be very tough. But the strength they have, that inner strength they have with the Saturn and Aries, right? Investment bankers, like, that's not a warrior, but that's still a warrior. Like, I can't imagine it's easy to hold that seat when you're an investment banker. And actually, if we go back up to his chart, yeah, if we go up to Lehman's chart here, that Saturn is going into the fourth house from the moon, and we'll get there soon enough. But it was interesting. I think it was his, got it written here anyways. I've got so much written. I think it might have been his Rahu Saturn period. Not exactly sure, but it was a Saturn period when there was a kidnapping attempt on his kids, and when he was living in Brazil still. And the thing that saved them was bulletproof glass. The chauffeur was driving the kids to school, and someone tried to take it, but the bulletproof glass saved the chauffeur from getting shot, and so he was able to drive away and escape and get this guy's kids to safety. And the first thing he did was took his kids and his family, and he had dual citizenship with Switzerland and Brazil. And he took his kids and his family and he just zipped off to Switzerland. And again, that was, we see this in the fourth house, and that's giving this harsh responsibility for safety and security and protection and those kind of things as well. So again, that very strong strength. The other thing Saturn does, and I noticed this especially in the fourth house, but I think we're going to notice that all the way through Saturn, is it gives a sort of libertarian quality to it. Again, it's that strong sense of independence. But I saw this especially when Saturn was in the fourth house, because it's especially dealing with home and land. And so they really want that kind of self-sufficiency where they have a piece of land that nobody's telling them what to do on that land. This is my land, you can't tell me anything. And of course, in the first house, their personality is going to be a little bit like that. This is, I'm a sovereign being, you can't tell me nothing. And they usually have to really sort of insist on that because it's Saturn, because if Saturn's there, again, people don't take people with Saturn in the ascendant very seriously. They're kind of, they might get picked on when they're younger, of course. They might be bullied a little bit when they're younger because they're a little bit smaller, they're a little bit small. Again, they're not that strong. And so I think this sort of bullying when they're young makes them all that much stronger when they're older. So we'll skip down to the second. No, there we go. Oh, here we go. If we look again from the moon, this Saturn conjunct moon, we get guys like Jackson Pollock, really great artist, but he had some mental problems. He wasn't quite right in the head. I think we're going to see a lot of kind of brain problems. Virginia Woolf also has this. She wrote The Room of Her Own, which of course, Room of Her Own was all about, I want my independence. You can't tell me what to do, man. But bipolar, depression, especially with the moon, you're going to see more of these mental problems because it's really affecting the emotions. And Karla Homolka, she was a serial killer, I think a Canadian serial killer, actually, and actually ended up killing her own sister. I think, I don't remember the case. I was quite young when she was killing people, but they more or less put a lot of the blame on her boyfriend. And there was also, I don't know if this is Saturn and Aries, but maybe, because Karla Homolka, she was also having sex with her sister, with other women. I don't know if, I assume bisexual, not quite lesbian. And Virginia Woolf also had some of this going on in her family. Stepbrothers, a lot of abuse coming to her when she was younger. All of that. That's that bullying when they're young, really affecting them quite hard. What else do we got here? Get Kate Blanchett as well. I'm not quite sure if she had some of this similar abuse or stuff in her family. We don't really know. If we come to someone like Philip Adams, he was a journalist in Australia, kind of a hard-nosed, tough, ask the tough questions kind of a journalist. He grew up quite young. His father, I don't know, he was probably wasn't quite a teenager when World War II was going on. His father got shipped off to World War II. His mother ended up leaving the father and had these really abusive step parents. And what he said, and there was a quote from him talking about it here, but he spent a lot of his adolescence trying to defend his mother from these sort of sleazy boyfriends that she had. And so I imagine he was also getting a lot of abuse as well when he was young. Ended up dropping out of school when he was high school when he's young to get a job and help support the family and stuff like that. And so you see a lot of struggles in their early days. Got a guy like Ronald Reagan. I really associate him quite a bit with someone like Roy Rogers, both these cowboys from the old style cowboy Western movies. Again, both very libertarian, very independent sort of characters. Um, I'm not sure what their upbringing was like. I haven't had a chance to quite go into everybody yet, but like that, someone like Bob Dylan also has this. Can really see it in he's got it from his moon. And Bob Dylan, I know, as I recall, he doesn't have a great birth time. Um, but you can really see this sort of toughness in Bob Dylan, very independent as well, changed his music, his style of music quite a few times. When he went to electric guitar, he got all kinds of criticism. And I think there is a lot of that with these folks, getting a lot of criticism, getting a lot of blame, a lot of accusations leveled at them. And again, this just makes them all that much tougher. Really tough people. They'll do anything, these folks. If we come down to the second house, I found this very interesting, the second house Saturn. Again, debilitated Saturn in the second house. I would never imagine these people would be singers. But John Lennon has this. It was actually a Saturn Antardasha. And I probably got it listed below, but it was a Saturn Antardasha when John Lennon made it big, when the Beatles put out the first album and they made it big and they just made it huge. And Ringo Starr also has this, which is kind of interesting. John Lennon also did the split with the Beatles because he wanted more independence. Ringo Starr went on to be a independent artist as well. Um, Richard Pryor, I don't know much about him, but stand-up comedy, one of the early black comedians in the USA. Really, a lot of his comedy had to do with sort of racism and the blacks in the West. And so he probably also had a really tough time coming into prominence. We also get Rudolph Kemp who was an opera conductor with this. And again, I had a really tough time understanding why all these singers had this and these musicians. But the only thing I can imagine is the Saturn really makes people work hard. And John Lennon, I don't think he wasn't really necessarily aiming to be a musician in a lot of ways. Maybe Rudolph Kemp was. Um, John Lennon was kind of class clown. He was doing a lot of drawings and stuff. He was fairly late in his adolescence before he kind of got into music. And then he got hanging out with some guys who were musicians and started to really work at it. So I think on one hand there was a lot of sort of doubt about his voice, the doubt about his own abilities to sing and this kind of thing. And in the second house, there's probably not a lot of wealth in the family growing up either. Um, I'm not sure John Lennon might have been. I think these guys were kind of middle class growing up, but I'm not really sure. Richard Pryor was quite poor growing up. Um, and this kind of thing. And the other thing the Saturn in Bharani can do, I think, is sort of brings a lot of, because Bharani has that Venusian quality to it. And so this sort of stuff like um oh, I drew a blank on his music. Anyways, it might have had to do with some of the LSD and some of the drugs they were doing as well, because second house is sort of the thing, it's the mouth, and so it's also the things we put in our mouth, and so those kind of things. Um, Yeah, again, I really struggled, especially with John Lennon's chart. I tried turning that chart every which way to find a to find an option for Saturn in second, and really it just works for him. The other thing I noticed about this, because second house is the image we project to the world. And so a lot of these people are probably also going to be wearing black, be wearing darker colors, um, darker features, darker hair, darker, maybe also bad teeth, um, are probably going to be there. I don't know. John Lennon and Ringo Starr are both English. English are famous for bad teeth. Um, if I can take a shot at the English before I go there. Um, and I'm not really too sure about that. You get from the moon, you get guys like, I'm not sure about David Koch. I think I need to look at his chart again, but he was chemical engineer. But you get guys like Doc Holliday, who was himself a dentist. Verushka von Lenderhoff, she was a model. Again, really sort of this almost something very dark and sexy to a lot of these characters with the second house. It's that sort of, I noticed it especially with Bharani, but you get it a bit with Ashwini as well. This kind of Catherine Zeta-Jones, Marie Soleil Tungas. She was a black, what was she? Kind of a journalist, I guess, sort of a talk show host kind of a character. Bill Guerin, he played hockey. A couple hockey players we see there too. Again, they're kind of this tall, dark, and handsome, I guess, to a certain degree, with this Saturn. And part of what that sexiness, and the sexiness I think is important with this position of Saturn, because part of that sexiness I think comes through because they project themselves with Saturn. It's like, I notice this a lot with Saturn in first house and Saturn in second house. They're kind of objectify themselves. Right, and that's what, well, a lot of the, especially the, like a model, for example, who we see as quite sexy. A lot of actors and stuff who also we see as sort of tall, dark, and handsome. Part of that is because they are objectifying themselves, and we can sort of, they get seen as objects. And so that objectification sort of, I hate to say it, kind of makes people a little bit more sexy rather than just like handsome. You know, you can be ugly, and some of them I think aren't really necessarily that handsome of people. But again, they have that objective quality to them that kind of brings something a bit sexual into it. Yeah, I'm not sure Doc Holliday if he was very sexy, but he was sexy enough to get put into movies from the time forever. I don't know how many Western movies have Doc Holliday in it. There's some speculation that I'm actually not a Holiday. It doesn't really belong to me. It's my brother's father's last name. But there's speculation on that side of the family has some relation with Doc Holliday. So I guess I'm somehow related to Doc Holliday as well. Um, we see some studies of language coming out of this. Doc Holliday was studying grammar and rhetoric, and he was actually quite highly educated um, as well. Really focused on teeth, on dentistry and stuff like this. We get Ben English also had this from his second house. He was basically a talent scout for pornography. Um, I think they call that grooming nowadays. Um, so again, that's that sexual quality coming into this with Saturn. The other thing is with this Saturn in the second house is it rules the 12th house. And the 12th house brings this kind of dreamy, imaginative quality to things. And again, that's also if you objectify someone and then you bring them into that dreamy space, it really almost does get quite pornographic, right? Because you're not imagining how nice and their soul is, you know, you're imagining just seeing them as a body, just seeing them as an object. And so we can see that quite clearly with someone like Ben English. Now, Chuck Norris has been called one of the sexiest men alive at certain points. I'm not sure how that fits in, but we see more cowboy influence in first house. We see it in the second house also coming out through Chuck Norris. Um, he had a show I think that he was most popular for, maybe some movies as well, but he was a Texas Ranger. That's just kind of a cowboy fighter sort of character. I also found some stuff with this Saturn in second where they also seem to be fighting a little bit for things like free speech. It's like to say what they want to say, and I think also sort of they can be cautious in their speech when they're younger. Maybe they get teased, maybe they have some problems with it, but they also sort of take responsibility for what they say, right? They don't sort of, I think they're less likely to speak for someone else, you could say. Some actors, some models sort of get in this role of parroting what some product wants them to parrot or what some sponsors want them to say. I don't think these people are going to say that. They're going to say what's on their mind. Um, and they probably don't say much either with Saturn in the second house. Probably in the third house too, because third house brings communication in there as well. I say they don't say much, and then I look at Richard Pryor's name coming right up there, and he spoke a lot. He didn't have much nice to say though, right? His jokes were all like really dirty jokes also. So that might come in with this Saturn as well. Kind of a dirty mouth, potty mouth, you could say. We come into the third house, and now we're getting into more of the communication type stuff. We're getting into also this is ruling their first house. So their identity, they can get identified with like an organization, with a group. Um, there's some short travel here. I'm not sure if these characters are, because it would be really hard travel, right? With Saturn in third house, it's not going to be easy travels. I'm thinking some of them might have had these long walks into school or these kind of long walk kind of things going on. Um, but again, anyways, that getting that identity with the group, they might be quite busy people with like really rigid schedules as well with the Saturn in the third house. Really tough. It's like probably when they were young, they showed up 2 minutes late and got kicked out of class and this kind of a thing. Um, you had someone like Morgan Spurlock was interesting. He did this movie. I never saw the movie, but it was Super Size Me. And I can't remember exactly how long he did this and if it was just McDonald's or he ate a bunch of fast food, but he basically lived off McDonald's for like 6 months or a year or something like this. Um, it completely destroyed his liver. It completely, but this was probably also like this takes a lot of, like I'm not sure if I could live on McDonald's if I really tried, right? I wouldn't have that kind of discipline to go in every single day just to McDonald's or just to eat this fast food. I'd be looking for something else, and the body was probably craving other things as well. Um, I think it took a bit of discipline to also do that. Now, we get also I, a lot of militancy with this position. We get Prince of Denmark, who is sort of a military leader. You get Eric Prince, another mercenary leader. Um, Benjamin Franklin actually set up a lot of the early militias in the USA to fight the British, still fighting the British at that time. Dick Cheney as well was involved with Hal Burton. He was actually quite close with Eric Prince. I think they were working together quite a bit for the Iraq War. Um, those kind of things come out from this. Yeah, Eric Prince says every individual who's worked for Blackwater in Iraq has previously served in the U.S. military as a police officer. Many were highly decorated from the beginning. They honed and detailed their contracts to ensure intensive government direction and control. I think some of this might have to do with like when you get into that really sort of hard corporate world, um, again, like military, you get these really rigid contracts. You get these really, the paperwork all has to be done, all has to be done perfect to a T, that sort of thing. Helen Keller was a bit of a struggle for me as well. Um, she was deaf. Third house rules ears. I don't know how many of these people might have problems with their ears with the Saturn in the third house. I would also expect the hands, the arms. These could be hard workers as well, very skilled with their hands over time. Really much, probably much more focused on sort of skills training of the third house than they are with the ninth house, the higher wisdom and that kind of thing. We also get mentality coming in into the third house. And so these guys are probably, and first lord is there as well. So it's kind of that first and third are getting mixed with this Saturn. They both have that Saturn influence. And so again, really hard dudes, really tough mentality, really just sort of I'll do what I can. Now, Helen Keller, of course, she's deaf. She had some problems communicating. This Prince of Denmark also had what was it? Kind of a dyslexia and some speech impediments as well that he had. So we might see that some again communication problems Saturn's dealing with, but again overcoming them and working through them. The prince still went up and he gave public addresses and spoke to the public. He had to. You know, someone like Benjamin Franklin's chart. Benjamin Franklin's chart is kind of interesting here as well, because that Saturn is in the third house. So he was dealing with these militias. He also, was it Franklin? Oh yeah, he was also a Mason, which is interesting. That's that third house, the kind of groups. He's really serious about these groups and organizations. The Masons at that time, kind of interesting. America's built by the Masons, right? They got their independence. That was the whole fight, independence. A big part of Benjamin Franklin again was sort of free speech or freedom of the printing press. He owned all kinds of printing presses and newspapers and dealing with that. At the time, of course, that was all ink. And so we're getting this Saturn in the third house is going to bring some blackness to the hands as well. And so I think that's ink on the hands. We'll get these hard workers working with the ground as well, I think, in some cases. And they're not afraid to get their hands dirty, you could say, with the Saturn. The other thing with Benjamin Franklin, he spent a lot of time in Europe as well, kind of doing these negotiations. He hated Europeans, but he ended up staying there. To be honest, I think he hated his wife even more than he hated Europe. Saturn in seventh house in his chart. He kind of left the wife at home and well, God only knows what he was up to in Europe, trying to go negotiate with the French as well to fight with the British against them. These kinds of things. We see Dick Cheney was doing a lot of similar things like that. Leibniz was also a very similar role in government that Dick Cheney had. This kind of thing. Alex Trebek, I kind of wonder how Jeopardy works into this, and even the word Jeopardy sort of does conjure up a little bit of Saturn and Aries type stuff. But again, he had to really control. There was a very specific way that questions had to be asked and answered in Jeopardy. I was never a big Jeopardy fan, so I can't remember exactly how it worked. But I think they gave the question, and people had to answer it in the form of a question. Who is Thomas Jefferson? So this kind of a thing. Very strict protocol on that. I'm just skimming through Deva Premal's chart here. She did a lot of, well, she was vocalist is what we mostly know her for. But when she was young, she was involved with all kinds of music. Her family was very musical. I'm wondering how much this has to do with some of the, maybe the guitar, the heavy calluses on the hands from playing music and that kind of stuff. She has this lovely voice, but if you look at her, she's kind of like, she's tough. She's a hard girl. And yeah, Patsy Willard. I'm not sure what else she did other than Olympic diving. Again, I still have to go into these charts. One of the interesting things is we get like something like Saturn and Kritika in the third house. There was no people on my list. I must have over like 2,000 people. I don't know how many people I've got. Thousands of people on my list making these, filling in these places. And so where people are missing, I find it very curious. I'm always asking like, why? Why like this? Why Saturn and Kritika? Is there no people? Is this some kind of death inflicting position where people just don't live long enough or they're not actually born? Because I also have like babies who were killed when they were babies or died when they were babies in my lists. Not many of these, but I've got some. And still nobody comes up for these kind of Saturn and Kritika in third house. So I'm always asking why like this. Now, we come to that fourth house. I already talked about this sort of libertarian wanting to safety and security of this, but we get someone like John Archibald Wheeler has this, and he was into building nuclear reactors. Well, that really raises the question of safety and security. That really becomes a huge highlight of his work, of his career, of what he does. Saturn's also, we should mention that it also deals with work and career and these kind of things as well. Um, we get David Koch, chemical engineer again, probably dealing with a lot of safety and security of um, of not just of the space of the land of the environment, trying to secure that environment around them, but also to a certain degree, probably securing the information as well, right? Patents on all of this stuff. A lot of it probably has to do with military sort of stuff. So there's be some top secret kind of things going on here as well. Mother Teresa is interesting to see her here. Um, Mother Teresa is interesting that I put her here because her birth time came up, and you look at her birth time. I can find it, but I don't know what it is. But there's a little note with her birth time. They weren't really sure if her birth time was in Gregorian calendar or Julian calendar. And I believe she was born in Latvia at that time, and Latvia at that time was actually following the Julian calendar. So I converted her chart to the Gregorian calendar. So she's somebody that you'll probably find quite different charts for. Again, I'm not sure if it works or not, but it seemed to work. She was working around lepers for the most part. She she she's sort of famous for, we think of her more tied to the church, and we think of her as maybe running a church or sort of healing centers, but she was very much involved with education in her earlier days in there. And a lot of what she did was providing home, providing living space, again, some kind of security and protection for the most vulnerable kind of people, lepers, like that. We also get, well, here's Machiavelli coming up with this in the fourth house. Dana White was UFC president. He also had a very difficult upbringing. I always wonder about Cancer or fourth house placements when it comes to fighters, because they're doing all their fighting in a bound ring, right? Boxers, UFC, kind of cage match kind of stuff. Um, but there's rules in this sort of bound ring. So I think that comes to play to a certain degree. Um, we got Muhammad Ali also has this. We get some, quite a few serial killers have, quite a few serial killers also have the Saturn and Aries, not necessarily fourth house, but we see a couple. Um, Jorge Paulo Lehnman, of course. Some very rich Rothschilds also have this. Again, Michael Bloomberg, again, very, very rich man. Again, I think it's that wealth sort of makes it so they have to secure their environment all that much more. Maybe even have bodyguards around them to help keep them safe, to help protect them to a certain degree. Someone like Gary Gilmore, murderer. Um, Again, there could be some, well, he went to prison. And fourth house could also deal with things like prisons, right? Really rigid rules in the home and really harsh consequences for breaking those rules, right? And so you get quite rich people who have this. Interesting to see someone like Hunter Biden has this, because I've just been noticing some he rented some place by the beach, I don't know, somewhere in USA. Anyways, he rented this place by the beach and he didn't pay rent for a year. He changed the locks and he had the Secret Service kind of defend that. And so we might see these disputes with landlords going on as well, and other landlords, landowners. Um, Maybe some encroaching on other properties. Machiavelli, right? He was, that's all what it was about, is disputes over land and territory and these sorts of things. Matt Damon is interesting. Now we bring this up on the dispute post because was it Matt Damon? Anyways, I think it was Matt Damon. He did a movie about blood diamonds quite a few years ago. And you think this is because he's a nice guy and he wants to sort of anyway secure the land and make it, well, less, the diamonds less bloody. But actually at the same time he did that movie, he was also heavily invested in synthetic diamonds, what they were started to make at that time. And so there was yeah, sometimes these people seem like they're doing a really nice thing, but they're also really quite selfish as well. And so we might see a lot of that selfishness come through with Saturn and Aries, generally speaking, not just in fourth house. Again, they seem like they're being nice and trying to help out the less vulnerable. Mother Teresa had all kinds of criticism about this. Oh, it looks like she's doing such nice things, but she was hoarding the opium. Apparently, she was selling a lot of it, and I don't know if she was putting the money into the church or where that money was going, but she made a lot of money for her and her church and didn't actually help many of the people she was supposed to be helping. Like Ronald Reagan, a nation that can't control its border is not a nation. Right? You might say this about a house and a home and these kind of things as well. Chuck Norris, men are like steel. When they lose their temper, they lose their worth. And so that might have been some of that sense to control oneself. Okay, yeah, with Aries, and it's interesting as I've studied Aries more and more on the Saturn placements in this. God, astrology is so difficult, man, because there seems to be it's so confusing, because okay, we make our chart and we've got an ascendant, and we'll use my chart as an example. My ascendant is Scorpio. And then we've got a moon, and my moon is in Gemini, so we can use that as an ascendant. But I swear we can just turn these charts to Aries ascendant, the natural ascendant, and look at them from that perspective as well. There really seems to be that sort of natural Aries as well that comes in there. Chuck Norris also said if some thug breaks into my home, I can use my roundhouse to kick, but I prefer he look down the barrel of my gun. And so these are serious, tough dudes, right? Um, Ronald Reagan basically had the same philosophy. Layman, of course, bodyguard security. Any Rothschilds, again, very heavy security. Hunter Biden had Secret Service keeping him safe. Not too sure about this Craig Matheson. He was a polar explorer. His Mars was in Scorpio, so kind of reversing the debilitation to a certain degree. But again, the Mars and Scorpio is going to give that I think it is in Giesta as well to lead these teams through the Antarctic, these very dangerous terrain where you do have to be very disciplined. You've got to kind of mark off your home and your territory. You really have to know where you're going to sleep and how you're going to sleep. And again, even very dangerous to go to sleep in some of these areas. And I'm not sure what his home life growing up was like, but we get that. Someone like Martin Sheen is interesting. We've talked about the bullying nature of this. He grew up, the doctor pinched one of his arms, and he's got sort of this gimped arm a little bit to a certain degree. Yeah, father was a factory worker, family grew up also fairly poor. So we get all of that kind of thing. Talked about John Lennon and all these other characters. Already Matt Damon, here we go into fifth. So we get the Saturn into the fifth. Fifth house has a lot to do with our intelligence, our ability to express ourselves as unique individuals, I guess you could say. And we see a little bit of rigidity here. Again, Machiavelli is probably not gonna suggest that you just, do anything you want. He's gonna say, well, you have to invest your time, your energy is really what the fifth house is this where we invest our energy, what we put our energy into. Um, it's a very creative house, so I'm gonna expect difficulty with children. I don't think Doc Holliday had children. I'm not sure about some of these other characters now that I think. Carla Homolka, she doesn't have children. We see also some guys going into prison, Lee Harvey Oswald. It was interesting, when they were arresting, they said, I'm just a patsy, man. So it's Lee, I'm just a patsy Oswald sort of an idea, getting blamed, getting accused, perhaps for things that he didn't do or didn't feel that he did. Um, someone like someone like Neil Diamond has this fifth from his moon, and he's kind of interesting because you want to talk about a hardworking musician. This guy was on the road pretty much his whole life, on the road, working the stage, working the crowds, dealing with the people, like really hardworking, really hardworking musician. Richard Pryor was probably similar to that, getting up and really also, I would think that the fifth house has to do with a lot of the sun things, right? Because it's Leo placements. So it has a lot to do with truths. And so it might also be really harsh truths that come out with this. It's like Machiavelli. You might not like the prince, but there's a really harsh truth that we have to face with everything that he lists out in the prince. This kind of a thing. Um, I say truth, but then you get someone like Doc Holliday. And actually, most of Doc Holliday's reputation was a complete lie. He was a bit gimpy. He was kind of weak. They say he barely knew how to shoot a gun. But what he did was he spread all these rumors and lies around about all these people that he'd killed and about how tough he was as a kind of a deterrence, I guess you would say. So that probably worked out pretty good for him. They figure one of the first people he ever shot was in the fight in OK Corral, the famous one that always gets put into the movies. So this kind of thing. Um, Interesting. We see quite a few killers here. Calamity Jane, really tough as nails, kind of a woman back in the Old West. Very pioneering as well. And a lot of what they do. Should mention that with any of these Aries placements, that Saturn will be very pioneering somehow in their work. Really trying to do new things, things that haven't been done before, like Richard Pryor with his dirty mouth, talking about the racism, getting a black comedian getting up. Um, Jonathan Wheeler was the first one to start building nuclear reactors. Matt Damon's with the blood diamonds and the synthetic diamonds kind of stuff, all of this kind of thing. Frontiersmen, frontier people sort of idea, pioneers. however you want to put it. We look at Machiavelli's chart here. He spent a lot of time on the run actually, and a lot of time hiding from authorities because everybody wanted a piece of him. I believe. Oh, I jumped out of the way here. Yeah, he wasn't very popular with the kings who were in power, right? Because he was, well, telling everybody how to overthrow the king and take their job. So this kind of stuff. We'll skip now down to the sixth house with this Saturn, and it's ruling the third and the fourth house. And the sixth house, of course, it's crime, it's imbalances, it's illnesses and things like this. So I am going to expect probably some problems with the head, with the brain, with this Saturn. Probably also digestive troubles will certainly be there. But the third and the fourth own are also going in the sixth house. So we're going to see chest problems. And Doc Holliday in particular, I think he had TB, which again is a chest problem with the lungs, this kind of thing. And we see a lot of these people are basically involved with gangs. A lot of gang activity, a lot of like really bad dudes, bad friends. This is the fourth lord as well. So certainly their upbringing when they were younger was probably a really bad neighborhood. They might have had to get involved with gangs to some degree for their safety, security, to find protection. Um, Over here in Krittika, we get this Bernadine Dorn. She was a communist, radical American communist, and they were involved with several bank robberies. There was a bomb explosion that killed some of her friends. And that's third house, those kind of bad dude kind of friends, and and also the deaths of some of these friends. Vincent van Gogh, Picasso, both have this as well. Um, Both of them probably had lead poisoning from the paints they were using, toxic sort of poisoning in the blood, some kind of blood poisoning, you could say. Heavy metals in the blood are also likely to be here with this Saturn, these sorts of problems. Um, and again, these heavy metals in the blood, a lot of times they make people crazy as well. And so this becomes a bit of a mix. And while Vincent van Gogh didn't live very long, Picasso lived quite long. Um, but he was dealing with all kinds of different materials with his etchings and stuff, different chemicals that he was working with. Picasso never used protection or any kind of safety stuff for any of this sort of thing. Um, Alexander Fleming, biologist, penicillin, also dealing with the blood and working with the blood disorders and that sort of stuff. It's kind of amazing how many kind of crazy artists we have with this. Van Gogh, Picasso, Bruce Lee he was a martial arts actor, but he was very almost avant-garde in his personal style as well. James Joyce as well, the writer. Nobody can even read Ulysses. Nobody has a clue what that book is saying, but it's considered a literary masterpiece. Um, I don't know if you guys have read it. I dare you to try though. Uh, I don't even think I made it through the first page. I tried a couple times and it sat on my bookshelf until I sold all my books. Um, we get these other L. Ron Hubbard's another interesting one to see here. He was a science fiction author, and then he wrote this book called Dianetics and started Scientology. And it's this kind of weird cult-like religion. That a bunch of actors belong to. John Travolta, whose name I saw somewhere. No, it was his daughter, I think, has Aries. Um, but again, I mentioned the gangs. It could be these kind of cults as well. When I see someone like L. Ron Hubbard there. Frank Abandando was a mob hitman. Clifford Olson, serial killer. Lee Harvey Oswald. Nobody knows if he did it or not, but he certainly got blamed for it. So and I suspect even Frank Abandando, he was a mob hitman, but this was sort of like that was back in the days, the mafia and Wall Street were both kind of on the rise at the same time. So you had these Rockefellers and these Mellon, what's his name? Someone Mellon. Anyways, another guy like the Rockefellers kind of running Wall Street. And you had these mobs running kind of the underground version of Wall Street to a certain degree. And so I think Franco Bandando just sort of probably had some people go against him, is the only reason he ended up getting charged. Although he was a bloody murderous sort of a guy, but nonetheless. Oh, this is sixth house as well. And so there could be debts, right? These really harsh, heavy, consequent debts. And in a sense, that's what Frank Abandano, a mob hitman, that's what he was doing, was collecting debts, or perhaps also dishing out the consequences of people that had debt. Al Pacino's interesting. The more I look at his chart, of course, he did some gangster movies, but the more I look at his chart, the more I think he's actually a gangster in real life as well. um, um, so there's Al Pacino. Edward Norton was interesting. Again, another actor. And this is the fourth house going in the sixth. So we're going to see some jail stuff as well, right? Because the home is going living with a bunch of bad dudes. And Edward Norton's interesting. He did a bunch of prison movies. I don't know how many. I don't think I saw any of his prison movies. He did Fight Club. That was his big thing, of course. Again, that split personality that was going on in Fight Club was also very seemed very Saturn and Aries. Um, but he did a bunch of these prison movies, and he actually went and lived in some of these really tough prisons and went and lived with the prisoners in order to prepare for these roles. So again, takes it very, very seriously. I'm not sure how they secured his safety while he was in these prisons, but again, there was probably very strict protocol and really, really again taking it seriously and really having to be careful. Third Lord, so we're getting very dark, sort of dangerous mentality with many of these people. I think it was Picasso's chart, maybe. I think it was his Saturn placement. Every time a Saturn period came, he broke up with one of his girlfriends and got a new one right away. And some of those breakups took a long time also. They really dragged out a lot of them, where a lot of times he had two girlfriends at the same time because the other one hadn't quite fully broken up with her yet, and he'd already kind of moved on. It just keeps going. Yeah, Jennifer Lopez also, she had some kind of gangster boyfriends at one time. She was with some guy. He ended up shooting up some nightclub. She didn't get charged. She ended up getting away from that. But again, also tough breakups. Taking a long time to do these breakups as well. Naomi Campbell is interesting. A model. And not long after she really made it big in modeling, her modeling agency dumped her because they said no amount of money or prestige could justify the abuse we take from her. She's been accused of assault 9 times, no, 11 times, sorry, which was probably in her Saturn Mahadasha. Only convicted 4 times, so she's not that bad. But again, they have a dark, sort of violent mentality, it seems, with this Saturn and Aries in the sixth house. Bernadine Horde, Weather Underground was the name of her organization she was involved in. Some of the Dorans. She also ended up, her and her husband, yeah, she married yeah, Iyer is her last name. She married the sort of head of that underground organization, Ayers, and he's got huge grants to transform the education system in Chicago. And Chicago now has the worst education system in America. And when I looked into it, I almost think he was probably heavily involved in some of these Black Lives Matter protests, because I think his involvement with education had much more to do with organizing gangs and sort of training kids to, very Machiavellian, of course, training these kids to overthrow the authorities, overthrow the government kind of a stuff, much more than it was with to do with actual transforming. Anyways, that's her husband. And some of the other characters in that group, they got busted robbing a bank, armed robbery. They killed some people during the robbery. And so her and her husband are taking care of their kids, of these other gang members who are in prison. So some of that kind of stuff comes through. Now we get Saturn in Aries in the seventh house. This is fourth and fifth lord. This Saturn's becoming a Yog Kataka Saturn, actually. And I've noticed that Yog Kataka, the placements, Yog Kataka almost seems to also reverse debilitations to a certain degree. They still get a lot of really good things come through the placement of that. And so we get we see a transgender model artist. Um, yeah, I can't imagine there's going to be a lot of love in these people, although you usually say love relationship when you see the fifth lord in the seventh house. Um, Again, they're quite abusive people for the most part. Richard Hawking is famous for, or yeah, Stephen Hawking, sorry, is famous for that kind of thing. Shannon Doherty, she was famous for she had like a bad girl actress kind of reputation. She was oh geez, I was just a kid then. You guys might not even know me about before your time. Beverly Hills 90210, I think it was. Anyways, famous show back when I was young. Everybody went crazy for it. Anyway, she was the bad girl on that. She also afterwards, she had some fairly destructive relationships as well. Um, but I think we're going to see a lot of these people sort of avoiding relationships to a certain degree, kind of like Mother Teresa did. I can't say that because, yeah, some of these other characters did have relationships that went fairly well. Yeah, let's do a quote from Benjamin Franklin. Grievances cannot be redressed until they're known. They cannot be known but through complaints and petitions. If they are deemed affronts, the messengers punished and the offenders will thenceforth send petitions. God, they used to speak funny in those days. And and who will deliver them? Wise governments encourage the errance of grievances, even those that are very lightly found foolish. Governments did the opposite to their peril. When complaining is a crime, hope becomes despair. I put this in, I think it was this last part, this hope becomes despair, because one of the things Saturn is quite famous for in the seventh house is what we see when we look out to the world. And so what they see is they become very pessimistic against. And so I think there's a lot of I might go into this kind of bad girl reputation Shannon Doherty had, because they end up fighting against the world. They end up fighting against that opponent. Bruce Lee, Edward Norton also had these they were fighters. They looked out at the world as like something to struggle against, something to fight against, like a wall that they had to kind of break through to a certain degree. And a lot of them did break through that wall. Of course, Bruce Lee did die a bit early, killed in basically a work accident. I think it was an explosion that killed him on set while he was there. But there becomes a lot of this sort of pessimism in these people, but it makes them very that much sort of, there's a sense of diplomacy in the seventh house. How you deal, how you negotiate things, how you negotiate with the world, how you negotiate with their partner. And so you're going to find a lot of that abusive partnerships, but you're also going to find some very rigid ways of negotiating. And we see someone like Nancy Pelosi has this. She was the speaker in American politics, and she's really like she's got her direction. She's got the things that she wants, the bills she wants to pass on this, and she's very hard nosed about that. Rob Ford as well was, I think it was Rob, maybe his brother. I think they were both mayors of Toronto in Canada. But Rob Ford had a lot of drug addictions and things like this. Um, didn't seem to, he was more involved with football, big football fan. And again, football again is that sort of idea where you're up against a brick wall and you've got to smash through that brick wall and get through it. Someone like Jimmy Caviezel, anyways, the actor who played Jesus, who's Ashwini ascendant, he's also I've heard him talk about this. Christian in Hollywood, very hard to get through, very hard to get into these roles. Even playing Jesus, he got a lot of criticism. Again, it's that sense of breaking through. Hunter Schafer, transgender model, artist, things like this. Again, looking out at this world is this world that's putting up walls in front of her everywhere, or him. I don't know which way she went or what. Anyways, um, anyways, transgender person is going to see there's all these walls in front of them, and really having to break through those walls and to make changes and to do anything really. So we get this in the eighth house now, Saturn in the eighth. And the eighth house has to do with our secrets, has to do with usually more chronic illnesses come into the eighth house. I saw, where is he? He's here somewhere. Yeah, here he is, this Phineas Gage. He's I struggled with his chart so much. But I think I finally got it figured out now as well. Saturn in the eighth house. He was a railway boss. I think that's some of the six lord in the eighth is also their work can be quite dangerous and have a lot of, well, injuries at work are quite likely. Um, and this kind of thing. And anyway, so Phineas Gage, he was using a tamping bar, a big metal rod, and pushing some explosives. He was an explosive expert building railroads. And it blew up, and the rod shot up through his jaw and up through his brain. And he survived this and became a huge study for people who study the brain, because it left certain parts of his brain and his memory intact, and he lost other parts. Anyways, it changed him. Apparently, he was a railway boss, but apparently he was still quite polite and quite a nice guy until after this accident. And then he couldn't keep his job anymore. Um, he ended up traveling around, became a bit of a sideshow for a while, drove stagecoach as well for a while. Again, I think he went to Brazil or Argentina to drive stagecoach, something like this. Anyways, quite a dangerous job. Um, I'm not sure. I see a hockey player, this Pavel Bure. I know I haven't looked deeply into his chart, but it makes me wonder if he hasn't had some concussions to the head, and sudden injuries, accidents on the job, sort of stuff. Martin Spurlock, we mentioned with Super Size Me. That was his job. He was writing a book about all this fast food, and it basically it ended up killing him. I don't think he died from his liver problem, though. I think he had a kidney problem is what killed him. Um, but again, the message there is eat your fast food in moderation, I guess. Because that stuff will kill you. Anyways, so we Werner von Braun, he was a rocket dealing with rockets and propulsion, also dealing with things like the jet fuels and stuff. We get some military guys here, Calamity Jane, um, She was part of the Wild West show eventually. She wasn't an actress by any means. She was a tough frontierswoman, um, chewing tobacco like a man, you could say, back in those days. But she ended up joining the Wild West show. But still, they were using real guns to shoot cans off each other's heads, or I don't know what kind of crazy, stupid things they were doing. But it was quite the show, anyways. Um, Polar explorer Craig Matheson, again, very dangerous job. Naval officers. I'm not exactly sure how this would relate with someone like Anne Hesh, but this might have been some of the secrets. And again, I think there would be a lot of top secrets in their jobs and their work as well with this Saturn, because Saturn in the eighth house is going to have secrets that really need to be kept. Again, very sort of top secret sort of position. Joseph Mengele, Dr. Death, right? Some serial killers. Alice Bailey's an interesting one to see here. I'm not sure if this is dealing with her work in the occult or not. I'm not quite sure how this would play out with her, because she was less involved with keeping secrets and much more involved with writing out all this secret knowledge that she was getting and disseminating the Theosophical Society. She did get a lot of criticism. I've got a thing here going into forbidden, dangerous enemy territory. And Alice Bailey did wade into a lot of areas where she sort of didn't belong to a certain degree. Um, yeah, where the field wasn't exactly friendly to her in a lot of ways. Um, Peter Frost, we see up here. I got sick priest, but that just means he was abusing kids. Still have to do more research on him, but makes me think that the job isn't always dangerous because of other things involved, but they themselves might be making their job place dangerous. This kind of thing. But I also do expect some head injuries with most of these people, some definitely problems in the head. Um, there is some vipritrage with this. It's kind of like Phineas Gage. So he had the metal bar blow up through his head, but the vipritrage allowed him to, well, he ended up traveling as a sideshow and making money off this injury. Look, I survived this thing shot up like that. He became kind of I hate to say, a little bit of a circus freak, though, in a certain way. All the doctors, he became a very important person, right? All these doctors and all these scientists really wanted to study him and that kind of a thing. Jacques Cousteau, for most of history, man has had to fight nature to survive. In this century, he's beginning to realize that in order to survive, he must protect it. I was playing when I invented. Yeah, he did this. Yeah, that's right. Jacques Cousteau. He built the aqua lung. And this was a device that deep sea diving kind of stuff. And so again, going into this very dangerous areas for work. And so he invented the walking aqua lung. He says, I was playing when I invented it. I think play is the most serious thing in the world. And I think fifth house is play. And so I mentioned that also with Calamity Jane. She started going and she was just sort of playing with this Wild West show, but it was also very serious. And they weren't using blanks with their guns. They were using real bullets. So so I think in a lot of cases, Peter Frost, again, he's a sick priest. He was abusing kids. Um, but he was probably using play to kind of lure these kids in and do that sort of thing. So that's kind of interesting. It's quite often as well, the fifth lord and the eighth house, because fifth is in the intelligence and the eighth is this research. And so a lot of times with this combination, you get inventors, people that are inventing and making new things, like that. And so again, play is very serious business for these folks in a lot of ways. Of course, fifth lord in the eighth house. I don't expect this is going to be very good for children. Um, Certainly not the first child. Down the road, second child, third child, there could be. But I don't think it's going to be very good for that because it's very Peter Frost here because it's mixing that fifth house of children with the sixth house of crimes and the eighth house of secrets and sort of these explosive kind of secrets. And again, they're going to be really heavy tears of secrets as well. So that's kind of interesting how that works. Well, it's late. So now we get this, just give me one moment. I'm just gonna get a glass of water. So here we're getting the Saturn into the ninth house. And so this is going into their beliefs, into their, into the church. Was it Pope Pius? I'm just wondering if this Pope was the one who was exiled for a certain time from the Vatican and went into exile. And so that separation from the church might be there. But I don't expect most of these people aren't going to be particularly religious. Something like L. Ron Hubbard, this Dianetics, I think, is very similar to Ayn Rand's philosophy, very much focused on the individual and doesn't have much to say about that individual's role in society. It's all sort of me, kind of a thing. And so I think we see some fairly big egos with a lot of this. Um, yeah, the more I look at the names, there are some fairly big egos with all of this. Again, and that's not necessarily their ego, but it's their belief that their dharma, their path, becomes this very much focused, very sort of self-centered, focused only on themselves. The sixth lord up there, they're not going to have very good father figures at all. Um, Probably fairly abusive fathers themselves. We see that Peter Frost, the sick priest, he's got this from his moon. And so we might again see that sort of abusive father. He was abused when he was young. So now then he passed that abuse on that way. Someone like Marie Soleil Trougras, she also had a very difficult childhood growing up. Um, she was killed in an airplane crash. I'm not sure. It almost makes me think that maybe this goes into the eighth house for her rather than that one. Um, but someone like Dora Hoy, the dancer, she died fairly young. Um, who else? Well, I guess a lot of these people live fairly young. It's interesting that we get someone like L. Ron Hubbard, Dianetics and science fiction kind of stuff, and this Elton von Voigt, who is also doing science fiction. And so that's giving their beliefs, these odd beliefs maybe, kind of coming through, rather than believing in God, believing in aliens sort of stuff. Very literal sort of beliefs might come through this as well. Um, I'm looking at Deva Premal staring me in the face the whole time I say this, right? Deva Purnell, she sings the most beautiful music, the most lovely spiritual music you can imagine, right? She's just got this voice and she does mantras and even if you're like a tough guy like I pretend to be, you're still gonna love Deva Premal because she's just her music is just wonderful, amazing sort of stuff. Um, but for the most part, Anthony Gaudi, he was an architect designer. I think this was the architect. A lot of his stuff, he ended up doing a lot of work in the USSR. He did all the God, these days we just look at his architecture, it's just god awful like architecture. Very authoritarian, very square, very solid. He loved concrete. He was just like, wow, concrete is just the most amazing building tool in the whole world. Um, and that sort of thing. So again, it's going to give that very, very scientific perspective, I guess, right? Is what Saturn's going to do here. Now, Stephen Hawking, I see he's got that from the ninth house. Because a lot of times when Saturn's in the ninth, it also gives someone who is more self-taught, right? They had to come to their beliefs on their own. Again, their father figures in this case is pretty much useless father figures. Um, again, fighting sixth lord is going there, fighting with the father, as well as their seventh lord is also going into the ninth, which sometimes gives some unity with the father, some kind of relationship with the father, some agreement. Maybe they agree to disagree, perhaps. Um, but it's surprising to see Stephen Hawking there because again, usually they are fairly self-taught. Peter Paul Rubens, sculptor. I think he was doing a lot of things with bronze, but painting and sculpture and this sort of stuff. He had some work with the government as well. Um, quite highly educated that way. Clay Walker's a funny one. I got the question mark beside his name. There was two big musicians, Clay Walker and who's the other fellow? Not sure if he's got the Saturn and Aries. Anyways, came out at the same time when I was young. But there was these two country musicians literally had 7 planets in one house. Like just this like I don't even know where to begin to try to rectify this. You know, my instinct is to look for their whole life just being focused in one area. Um, but at least in his case, I wasn't able to find that. I do want to kind of move through this because I do want to talk about the transits a little bit too, and before we get going. So now we got Saturn and Aries in the 10th house here. We've got quite a list, some provocative journalists, Tucker Carlson, that Philip Adams that I mentioned. It's interesting to see the two of them side by side because Tucker Carlson is very right wing, conservative, and Philip Adams was just the opposite. Joined the Communist Party when he was young, very progressive in his views and stuff like that. Um, and I think Tucker Carlson has an AA placed. AA means Road and Trading AA, which is come from birth record. But now it's making me almost think Tucker Carlson might almost be because he takes his religion quite seriously. He might almost be Saturn in ninth, but we'll see. Anyways, Philip Adams, anyways, he's got this long career in journalism. He's sort of credited with reviving the film industry in Australia. I'm wondering how many of these people are going to also be doing some revitalization work, reviving things. Interesting in Tucker Carlson case, he basically got fired. What was he working for? CNN? Anyways, one of those big networks. I can't remember which one. Anyways, a big network news guy. And he basically got fired right when his Saturn Mahadasha started. And I don't know if what he's doing, but apparently he's supposed to be like independent. I'm surprised he must have some channel on X or probably has his own podcast thing going on now, but much more of an independent journalist now. And Philip Adams was also fairly independent in his journalism, also kind of asked the tough questions. Their style of journalism was quite similar, even though their beliefs were opposite. This kind of thing comes out of that. Um, I get a sense that these folks can be kind of, because it's that pioneering nature is still going to come into their work. In this case, they'd be Cancer ascendants. Um, I'm just comparing the look of Tucker Carlson and Philip Adams. And Philip Adams, I do believe, is a Cancer ascendant because he's like just round everywhere. White hair now as an old man. Maybe he's dead, but in later years, white hair, big round face. Um, and Tucker Carlson is quite different from that. Anyways, um, nonetheless, long career. Some similar things that we saw with the Saturn sixth lord. I was talking about these dangerous kind of work environments. And so I think we're also going to see that here. It's the eighth lord going into the 10th. So it's going to bring a lot of sudden shifts and changes in career as well will come from this. And we see that with someone like Armstrong Robinson, an inventor, a daredevil pilot. He was very much involved with testing airplanes, which, geez, you got to be insane to test an airplane, right? It's like, hey, I built this thing. It's supposed to fly. You want to try that out? You know, so he was one of these brave souls that, yeah, I'd love to. That sounds like a great idea. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think he did die um, in an airplane crash. So that's not a big surprise. Again, we've got this Bradford Washburn, a mountaineer, cartographer doing maps and things like that. Again, a lot of these earlier mountaineers were going out the first one to climb a mountain, the first one to get up and do some of this really crazy stuff that nobody else wanted to do. Tina Turner was also kind of to a certain degree, it was like kind of breaking a glass ceiling to a certain degree, doing these breakthrough kind of roles or these breakthrough jobs that others aren't necessarily willing to do. And Alice Bailey did that with Theosophy as well. Really broke through with this kind of stuff. We see some of the danger of Jacques Cousteau and Grant, Lupa Valles, died fairly early. China, also China was she was a female bodybuilder, and she got into, I don't know if she was into wrestling only or if she got into UFC. I'm not really sure too much, but she also died young. Um, Steroids and things kind of blew out her kidneys, and I think she might have ended up overdosing. Whether it was accident, I'm not sure whether or not that way. Um, we get into the Bharani side of thing, Ringo Starr, James Joyce, Lance Ellsworth, all very characters. All of these people are very much characters. Ringo Starr is still alive. I don't know how old he is. Beatles seem like they must all be ancient, but I guess it's not that long ago. Um, but this sort of avant-garde jazziness a little bit, very sort of, I think, because 10th house is the reputation. And so although it's sort of this very cool, I don't want to use the word cool because there's this heat to them as well. But I think in all these cases, these people are considered sort of very, very cool and the reputation for that. And they work very hard on their reputation as well. There would also be, it's also leadership in the 10th house. And so you get these leaders, you get these sort of, again, that very pioneering spirit is going to come into there, and very sudden shifts in their work, very sudden unexpected changes in their reputation. I don't think they would necessarily have good reputations. Um, Yeah, looking at this list, I don't think anyone necessarily had a good reputation. They're all known for being a little bit angry sort of characters, and that was probably regarding their work. A little bit not just unconventional, but unpredictable as well, because the eighth lord is going into the 10th house. But they would have anyways, they all managed to, that was part of their cool image. And so they all, for the most part, did all right from this. Also, the thing you're gonna get with this Saturn is they work all of the time. That's all they do is work. Work, the boxers are training full time. Um, right, the musicians are just working on their music all the time. James Joyce just writing, writing, writing. It's just all work and no play sort of idea coming through with many of these characters. I haven't really talked too much about the difference between Ashwini. I'll go through, we're almost to jeepers, we're not gonna quite get to the transits, I don't think. Um, so the 11th house here, this is gonna undercut some of their relationships with their siblings, with their friends. Probably some dodgy sort of friends, you could say. I'm not sure, there's some suspect, where is he? Yeah, Vincent van Gogh. Um, there's some suggestion that he was maybe killed by a friend. When I look at this, quite likely that it was a friend who shot him. Um, David Eggers, he was a writer. His parents died fairly early of, I think one died of cancer and one died of a car accident, almost back to back. He wrote a book with a very pretentious title called A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius. Um, I didn't find it that heartbreaking and it wasn't that genius, but he did do some very interesting things as an editor and a publisher. He started McSweeney's magazine, which was quite good. They did some really, really great stuff. Started publishing these quite a few books as well. But what he did with his something like publishing is one of these fields where you think, oh, there's only one way to publish a book, right? And no, he played. He flipped books upside down. He made it so halfway through you had to turn it around. He did a lot of different stuff with books. He really experimented quite a bit. Um, but anyways, back to his family. Um, one of his older sisters, I think it was his older sister. There's the older brother. Anyways, one of his older siblings killed themselves. Um, Hunter Biden as well. He had one of his older brothers also died in an accident, or I think an accident. So you're getting some of these, it's not good for the elder siblings kind of an idea. Virginia Woolf was likely abused by her siblings, her step siblings in particular. Um, I shouldn't say likely, she was abused by them and had sexual relations also with them. And I think there was probably um, violence as well in the family, and a lot of hard times for a lot of these folks. Christine Kelly, also very tough upbringing. Not sure exactly if she had the tough time with her siblings or not. Yeah, it might sometimes feel like everybody is dying around them. So we get this in the 12th house. Again, in the 12th house, we're dealing with the again Yogarika planet up in the 12th. This is going to bring a lot of isolation. Um, yeah, really just going away, getting locked away. I'm a little bit surprised. A little bit surprised there's nobody with jail here, but maybe it's Yogarika that keeps them out of jail. It's more like working out of the studio, working in isolation, working in foreign countries, this sort of thing. Oh, there we go. We got a Robert Brule, rape and murder of children, so he went to jail, at least. I should check because he might have got what do they call it? Anyways, the government might have killed him. And this kind of thing. I get a sense that there is a little bit of hiding from the government for some of these folks, but it's really a lot of isolation. A lot of Saturn in the 12th house gives a lot of heaviness that seems to hold them back. It gives them, there's things in their past as well that seem to be pulling them back. They can't quite overcome their past to a certain degree, because that's really what the 12th house has a lot to do with, is our past. It's subconscious and things like this as well. Some say past lives, but it's like, well, I look at my life now. If I look at the first 20 years of my life, that was a whole different life, man. I might as well call that my past life. And so I've got a lot of, well, I've got a lot of Rahu things in that past life, you could say. And so these guys are going to have a lot of those sort of Saturnius difficulties, guilt, um, and just a lot of dark thoughts, dark dreams, a lot of heaviness coming up through them. Again, there's a fair bit of violence in a lot of these people's pasts as well. So again, I would think probably abuse. I'm wondering how much this might be because this is the 10th Lord going up there. And so this might be more troubles from the boss because that's what the 10th house is, our job, but it's also our boss. It's the authority. Well, it's government also. And so escape, getting away from the government, this sort of thing, going away. It's like maybe with the Aries influence, it's a sort of idea that you can't get your independence unless you go off to an isolated place, right? It's like everywhere you're going, somebody's telling you what to do. But if you go out in the middle of the forest, which I have to admit I really like doing, nobody's there to tell you what to do. There are no rules back there. But of course, Saturn for these folks, there would still be a sense of rules and having to follow a certain protocol. Oh, so I should talk a little bit about the difference that we're gonna see and I'll just, whatever, I just stopped it at 10th house, for no reason in particular. Because there's gonna be these subtle shades of difference between the Ashwini, the Bharani, and the Kritika. And in the Ashwini, I think we're gonna see this pioneering role or this thing is gonna be a little bit more headless. They're gonna be a little bit crazier, you could say. Ashwini is especially, it's a spring point where the energy is just pulsing, right? And it is a pulsation in Ashwini. And so Saturn is going to slow that pulse. Again, it could be the actual pulse in the body. It's going to slow, it's going to bring some control to that pulsation. It's going to try to control that reactivity. And so this puts me in mind of like someone like Al Pacino, for example. When he was younger, he was a bit of a bad kid and not a lot of impulse control. And so early in their life, I think they're going to lack some of this impulse control. Again, we're seeing serial killers, we're seeing people abusing children with this. And life is going to, God help me, that their Saturn's not fully, you know, doesn't have too many malefic influences, but a lot of their life is learning to control that impulse. And so it's that sense of control. And once they can control the impulse, that's how they get their independence. And so when we come to the Bharani placements, Bharani is already the first step in controlling the impulse. And so I would get a sense that they're probably a little bit better, a little bit more self-control in Bharani than they have in Aries. And that sense of control, it's going to get channeled more into the arts. Could get channeled into things like sex as well, because Bharani is very sexy nakshatra. But it's going to get channeled more into those Venusian things like the arts. It might also get hidden a little bit more because Bharani is also going underground and that sort of thing. There's going to be Aries is such a funny sign, because it's the first sign, and we always see this sort of independence in Aries. But there's this strong side of Aries. There's a strong twinning energy as well, right? The Ashwini twins, Bharani is Yama and Yami, right? The two, I'll say the death twins, I guess, to a certain degree. And it's not until you get to the end of Aries where you start getting more of that independence through Kritika, uh, to a certain degree. And so you get this twinning energy, and so Bharani is going to um, find that control maybe also through others. And it's others who are going to say, hey, you got, whoa, 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 especially Bharani, right? Oh, you gotta control that a little bit. And I see Melania Trump here has this, and that might be like, well, she's got, I think, a little bit of resentment from having to be first lady, and having to control a lot of herself. She was a model before a lot of it, before she got into this sort of stuff. But now she's got Trump saying like, whoa, you got to control your temper, you got to control your anger, you've got to even control the passions a lot more. Whereas Ashwini is going to be trying to control more of that pure energy, right? That jump, that. I noticed I'm going in the dark here. There we go. Hi, guys, you can see me again. Um, I was like, hey, who's the dark guy in the corner? Oh, that's me. Uh, hi. Um, so anyways, so Ashwini's more of a pure energy that needs to be controlled, whereas Bharani, I think, is much more controlling the sexual energy, sexual impulses, and Kritika is more this criticism, and it can be very cutting. And I got Muhammad Ali here, and oh, he was a great trash talker. And oh jeepers, who was it that he used to trash talk? Oh, he was awful with this fellow. Anyways, one of his opponents. Anyways, he was always calling him like an Uncle Tom and things like this, and really trash talking, really cutting quite deep with some of this trash talk. But they also have to learn to control that cutting. Um, I also get a sense in Kritika that it's going to be, well, we see with Phineas Gage, right? He had a bar shoot up through his head. But Kritika is the razor. And so when you get Saturn in Kritika, you're going to be using a dull razor or a dull knife that you're cutting with. And as anybody who's worked with knives would knows, a dull knife is way more dangerous than a sharp knife in the kitchen. Right? The sharper the knife, it's going to just slide through, and it's not good. But as soon as you have to start putting those extra pressures on the dull knife, that's where people really get hurt. Um, and so Phineas Gage, while it was a bar, it wasn't a knife, but that's a very dull knife that went up through his head and did the cutting. So those are some of the differences I think we'll see with Saturn in Ashwini. Again, we talk about that pulsation of Ashwini. It's always a sort of like, almost like Morse code, right? You've got dots and you've got dashes, but you've got a sound and then you've got a silence sort of idea. Beep, beep, beep. And so when Saturn's there, it's going to really draw both of those out. There's going to be more sound and there's going to be more silence. And the duality really comes in. And again, with that twinning energy that we see, especially in Ashwini and Bharani, we're seeing a lot of these people with bipolar syndrome, right? Dual personality kind of stuff coming out through a lot of these characters as well. It's like on one hand, and they want their independence, and I'm very independent. But I think somewhere once you look into them, there's somewhere where they're relying on somebody else or they're relying on something else. Whereas something like Sun in Aries, that's where you get the fully independent people. They don't have to insist on it. They just know that they're independent, right? They're entitled to be independent. They don't need to ask anybody or demand it. Whereas the Saturn, they really have to sort of insist on their independence. Which, again, when you insist on anything, everybody knows the truth, you know? So there's that. So, Jeepers, I don't really have much time for this, but let's see what we can learn about this Saturn transit stuff in Aries, because this is quite interesting. There we go, Saturn and Aries. So I saw a lot of stuff to do with nuclear energy when I was going through this. Um, India and Pakistan testing nukes. If you go into the early days, it was like literally the inventors of nuclear weapons were finding their were studying the atom, quite literally. And and the atom, everybody focuses on the nucleus of an atom, but the atom is positive and negative. Again, there's that twinning energy in a lot of this kind of stuff. Um, Transportation related stuff, especially in the Aries stuff. Um, Now, what happens when Saturn is transiting a sign or a nakshatra in particular? So if he's transiting Ashwini, Ashwini has a lot to do with transport. And so what Saturn is going to do, he's going to restrict people's ability to get around until they work really, really hard to find well, Saturn really likes the public transport. And so the train, the electric trains, the International Space Station, quite a few things were involved with getting that up and going and getting people at the International Space Station. Again, the difficulty was the transportation between it. We get things, quarks were discovered, quirks and quarks. Used to be a radio station in Canada, CBC Radio. I used
Sorry, sorry, Mike, to interrupt you. I don't know if we are meant to be looking at your transit document because right now we are still looking at the other document.
Yeah, I hear you. There we go.
I'm
Uh,
not sure because sometimes it just stays in the old one. Yeah,
there we
thank
go.
you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll send this to you right after, Dana. Um, and if you want it as well, Heneen, I'll send it to you as well if you like. So, so yeah, here we get kind of that nuclear energy, that sort of stuff. The technology, we get the Intel created the SRAM. And the SRAM was it, I got to study. I don't know anything about any of this stuff, right? I got to learn as I'm doing all of this stuff. But SRAM is sort of this shorter term storage in the computer that sort of that makes it so it can quickly access those things, right? It stores like I think the time on the clock and the date and some of these things that just need to be there as soon as you turn your phone on or as soon as you turn your laptop on. It's all these things that are just, it seems to remember immediately. Whereas there's a deeper form of memory in the computer. I don't know what that's called because I don't know anything about it. That your computer has to kind of go and look for it a little bit. Whereas SRAM was this thing it could access very quickly. You get this ARPANET, which was some of the very first messages that were sent between computers. String theory, um, both the Nobel Prize and some of the theorists when they came up with the theory was a Saturn and Aries. And string theory, I don't know if you know about this. String theory it's brilliant, right? Especially for people studying Kashmiri Shaivism and Tantra and these kind of things, because well, a lot of these string theorists now they go talk to Mark Jackowski, my teacher in Varanasi, and they're like, explain string theory to me, you know, because it's this idea that the world is, if you look for waves, all you see is this whole world is just made up as waves. You don't see anything to do with particles. If you look for particles, you see that the whole world is just made up of particles and there's nothing to do with waves. And so depending on what you're looking for, you find that that's the 100% truth. And so part of, I think, what this has to do with, especially with the Ashwini, because Ashwini has a lot to do with the observer. I think that's the Ketu nature in Ashwini. And so the observer, what the observer is looking for, of course, makes a big difference on what the observer is going to find. And so we know this, like what we're looking for in the world. There's scriptures that say this. What you want is what you'll get, basically. They say it much nicer way than that. But this is the truth of the world. What you're looking for in the world is what you're going to receive. And so if you're looking for spirituality in this world, you're going to see that everything is spirit, and you're going to recognize and see the spirit in everyone. And if you're looking for more of a scientific validation of the world, all you're going to see is the things of this world. You're not going to see the spirit. So if you're looking for Shiva, you'll find Shiva. If you're looking for Shakti, you'll find Shakti. But the thing is, while you're doing that, you won't see, it's like the spiritualist goes out and he just sees everything as spirit and doesn't really pay much heed to the more objective qualities of things. They just sort of really looking for that. And as spiritual people, I hope that's what we're aiming for, is to really recognize and see the spirit in all things and in all beings. Otherwise, you put that aside and you start looking for the objective nature to things, and that's all you see is bodies and things. And and oh, I don't know how many conversations I've had with people like this, right? And oh, I don't mind. I'll take either side. I can see both sides, but you want to push buttons sometimes, right? And so people that don't see the spirit in anything, they just see the things, right? And you get into these arguments, and I know we're both right, but I got to poke a little bit and go, no, 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 no. What about the spirit of it? But what about what's inside? What about the essence of it? You know? And so we get this kind of thing with string theory. So it's hard to see the oil prices as it was going through. Energy, again, Saturn is conserving energy, especially Ashwini, is pure energy, is pulsing. And so energy is going to get conserved. There's going to be limited energy. And so what happened in a lot of cases I noticed is well, one of two things seem to be going on, especially with the price of oil. So either the prices, there was a lot of oil being supplied and the prices were going way down. And so OPEC would come along and say, okay, well, we're going to cut all of this. And the cuts, I noticed, especially Saturn, when Saturn got to Kritika, was when everything was getting cut. They were just cutting everything. They cut rations, they cut food supplies, they cut energy supplies, everything was getting. But so you get this restrictions put on energy when Saturn comes through here. I saw a lot to do with stem cells. I don't understand stem cells, but it came through a few times. This kind of stem cells approach here. HIV/AIDS also. The very first person with HIV/AIDS, Saturn was transiting this, and when they said it was a teenager, came into the hospital. Doctors had no clue what it was. They're like, what the heck is even going on here? So this kind of thing. Talk about breaking the glass ceiling. Catherine the Great took her reign while this was coming through. You just kind of see, I've got 5 minutes left, so I'm just sort of skimming through quite quick. Again, something like DeGeorge syndrome. This is, it was first described, but it's a congenital birth defect, a heart disease, a palate defect in the blood. And so I think, again, Saturn is limiting that energy, right? Low energy, heavy metals, we talked about earlier, heavy metals can be in the blood. When heavy metals in the blood, oxygen can't bind into the system. And so you feel weak and tired and lethargic, right? And so you do some kind of detoxification and you get more. That's why like something like sun is so powerful when it's in Aries, because these people are getting so oxygenated in their system, right? Sun or Mars, they're just like pure oxygen. They're just fired up. So this kind of thing. Lot of anti-war protests kind of came through in the Vietnam era, and this Vietnam era as well. That was fight for independence. You had a lot of governments, a lot of people fighting for their freedom, fighting for their independence when Saturn got to Aries as well. And so there we go to Bharani. I've got the big list here. On Napster, file sharing, it made more people more free. Yeltsin resigned. He put Putin in power. No logo. I don't know if you guys read this book. If you got any activism streak in your blood at all, you should read No Logo. It was very powerful for the activist circles at that time. I was just in college when that came out, and it was just like full power, man. basically against corporatization and talking about the logo was the branding of everything, right? And so people were looking for started looking more for the independent brands rather than the network stuff or the big the big brands, you could say. Um, Yeah, Hitler and Mussolini got together, decided to start war. This was just a little bit before World War II broke out, kind of thing. And that was Hitler and Mussolini, that's almost that twinning energy we also see and talk about as well. American Red Cross. Oh, the Ashwini placements. You see a lot of calls for help, calls for rescue. Titanic sunk when Saturn was in this position as well. Again, those emergency signals, those emergency calls for help started to come out. That sort of thing. Tuberculosis bacteria was discovered. Again, that limiting and lowering of energy. Um, anyways, we're pretty much at the end of this, so I guess we'll just wrap it up. So I hope everybody learned something from this today. I like doing it because it's always a surprise what I'm going to say. I never have a clue what I'm going to say. I just pray to God that I've done my homework and something good comes out of it. And, and I think I did because now I got to go write a bunch of stuff down. So thank you guys very much for coming today. And Mahadev.